Hello and welcome to our webinar today, all about everything you need to know about NCAA student athlete eligibility and the counselor portal. We've got a great presenter today who's going to impart all of the wisdom if you are working with NCAA student athletes. This is important information. Timely and pertinent for your students. We want to make sure that you get it. So welcome to the webinar today. As we've done in the past, we're going to start with some housekeeping. So just a reminder, we are in webinar mode. We can see your name that you're here, and we still want to interact with you. So feel free to utilize that chat box that you see at the bottom of the screen to directly communicate with the panelists, and we'll be able to respond back. But if you've got a question about any of the content that's provided today, if you'll use that Q&A box that you see at the bottom, it will allow for our presenter to answer it live or type an answer, and we'll be monitoring both of those throughout today's presentation. So we wanted to start with a little bit of a virtual icebreaker. So we've got a poll question for everybody as you're joining us. What percent of U.S. high school student athletes are awarded an athletic scholarship to compete in college? So I'm going to launch that poll. You will see it on your screen. And so we'll give you a few minutes to be able to answer that poll question. And we've got options of 5%, 10%, 2%, or 8%. So if you're just joining us, we've got a few people that have joined. Welcome to our webinar all about NCAA student athlete eligibility in the counselor portal. We're having an intro poll question that you can see. What percent of U.S. high school student athletes are awarded an athletic scholarship to compete in college? So we'll give you guys a few more minutes, few more seconds, about a minute total to answer as our colleagues join us today in this webinar. So we've got answer options 5%, 10%, 2%, 8%. All right, last call on answer options. About half of everybody has submitted their answer. One last call. All right. Answers are coming in. Looks like we've got a variety across the board in those. Well, I'm going to close in this poll out. So I'm going to share these results, and our presenter will kind of talk around this information around what percent of student athletes are actually awarded an athletic scholarship to compete in college, as I feel like this is a lot of kind of myths, maybe for students and for educators, in the amount of scholarships that students are able to receive. So I'm going to hand it over to our host for today, Shannon Grimsley, and she's going to introduce our presenter and get us started.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I am Shannon Grimsley, the Director of State Outreach for the Woodward Hines Education Foundation and the Get to College program. We are recording today's session, and we'll send it in a link to anyone who is registered. For those watching the recording, today's date is November 2nd, 2021, and the material in this webinar is current through the 21-22 school year. In today's session, NCAA Student Athlete Eligibility and Counselor Portal Explained, you will hear from Tori Holloway, Assistant Director of Gear Up Outreach. She will be speaking with you about all the things NCAA and how to help your student athletes navigate this process. I will now share a little background on Get to College and a few logistics about the webinar before we get started. Get to College is a nonprofit program of the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. We have 3 centers in Mississippi, one here in Jackson, one in Ocean Springs, and one in South Haven. We help parents, students, and high school counselors with all aspects of the college planning and financial aid process, and all of our services are completely free. In our centers, we offer personalized college counseling appointments where we can tell students when to apply for admission and scholarship and help fill out their FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which seems to be all we're doing right now is filling out FAFSAs, or we can advise on essay writing and interviewing. As Kirsten said earlier, during the webinar, we cannot see or hear you, but we do ask that you ask us questions through the instant messenger or the Q&A at any time. So again, our agenda for the day is we will hear from our guest presenter first, then we will have time for Q&A, and then we'll go over some upcoming webinars and give you our contact information. I will be moderating today as well as Kirsten Dufour. She'll be on the back end monitoring that Q&A. So if you have any questions, as we said earlier, please feel free to drop those in there for us. I would now like to introduce our speaker for the day. Tori Holloway is the Assistant Director of Gear Up Outreach here at the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. Tori is a native of Clinton, Mississippi. She has a bachelor's in communications and a master's in intercollegiate athletic administration. She received both her bachelor's and her master's from Mississippi College. Before joining the staff at Get to College, she was a former admissions counselor at Mississippi College, where she worked with many student athletes as they navigated the NCAA clearinghouse process. Tori, thank you for being with us today in between filling out FAFSAs. She's out on the road and squeezed us in today. So I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. I am going to share my screen with you all as we kind of talk about what is the NCAA, what is Eligibility Center, and what do you need to know as a high school counselor or someone that's involved in the process with students in the college going process. So first, I'd like to say that all of the information I know is really from just being in the field and working with counselors and student athletes. So like Shannon mentioned, I received my master's degree in intercollegiate athletic administration, and it sounds super fancy, but it's basically just, I went through the process of what it's like to assist student athletes at the collegiate level. And so one thing I love about Get to College is being able to be on the other side of that kind of equation of getting high school athletes to the college level. So that's what we're going to talk about today. You're going to come in contact with students all across the spectrum. You're going to come in contact with the student that from 8th grade, people knew that he was going to be or she was going to be a Division I athlete right out of junior high, or you're going to come in contact with that student that they have the talent, but maybe their parents see it more than college coaches do, and they bug you about getting their information submitted to the clearinghouse, all of those kinds of things. It goes on both ways, but I want to talk to you about today your role as a high school counselor and administrator, what your role is in that college going process for a student athlete, and then some updates, because as you know, with COVID-19, a lot of things changed, and the NCAA Eligibility Center definitely took a look at the challenges that students and student athletes were facing and made some adjustments. So we'll go through those. So the first thing I want to define is, what is Eligibility Center? So you have the NCAA, it's a governing body that covers Division I, II, and III. Schools that are a part of the NCAA have to abide by their rules. And so Eligibility Center is a place that student athletes go, submit their information, and it's a portal, and they see, am I eligible to play Division I or II sports? Okay, we're going to talk about the difference a little bit between Division I and II, the qualifiers, and also Division III having a certification profile. So I want you to know today, like I mentioned before, everything I learned was just in the field. I have the pleasure of serving in my off time from work alongside of Demario Davis, linebacker for the New Orleans Saints, as he has a nonprofit that helps students across the state of Mississippi, student athletes. And so a lot of the experience I have is just working with them as they navigate the college admissions process and college athletic process as well. So I hope to share as much insight as I possibly can. But please know, as you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And if we can't answer them today, we'll help you figure out, going step by step, the answer to that question. So as you look at Eligibility Center, you want to make sure that your student is aware of two things. Do they meet the academic eligibility requirements? And do they meet the amateur requirements? Okay, amateurism is something that you as a counselor and administrator can't really control. That's whether they were paid to play as a high school athlete, which none of them should be as a high school athlete. And it doesn't count as like rec sports, or maybe they're on a travel league baseball team, like that doesn't count. But there is an amateurism portal to the NCAA Eligibility Center, but that's not necessarily in your wheelhouse as much as the academic eligibility is, because your job as their counselor is as follows. So I just want to kind of talk through what your role is as a counselor, because sometimes I know this, and Kirsten and Shannon know this working with high school counselors. The question is not, what do you do? The question is, what do you not do? We know that your hands are in absolutely everything. So I want to streamline the only things that you really can do for your high school athletes that are pursuing a collegiate career. So the number one thing that you can do as a high school counselor is make sure that your school's account on Eligibility Center is accurate and up to date. We'll talk about what that means for your school's courses in just a little bit, but that's one of the number one things. The second is ensuring that any non-traditional programs offered at your school have been reviewed, because the way it works is your high school has a portal, and we're going to look at what that portal looks like this morning. And we're also going to show you how you can update those courses. Okay, then the third thing is encourage student athletes to create an Eligibility Center account, because as you'll see, if a student wants to play at a Division I or Division school, they have to have an Eligibility Center account. There's no way they can get around that, because they have to, like I mentioned earlier, meet the academic initial eligibility requirements and meet the amateurism requirements. So they have to have that account. The second to last thing you need to do is be able to submit fee waivers. Just like your student gets a fee waiver to take the ACT or a fee waiver to apply to college, if they get free and reduced lunch at your school, they get a fee waiver to create an Eligibility Center account. And we'll talk about how much that is in the process of submitting a fee waiver. And then lastly, upload official transcripts. So you're doing really what you do as you send high school transcripts, to colleges. You're doing that by uploading it to the Eligibility Center and also submitting those fee waivers. So if any parent or student is asking you to do anything outside of these 5 bullet points, they're probably exaggerating, because as a counselor, this is, or a coach, this is really all that you can do when you're getting them ready to be a college athlete. It's just making sure that account is accurate, making sure any new programs have been reviewed, because there has to be a review by the Eligibility Center, making sure, encouraging them to create that account, and then submitting their fee waivers and transcripts. Okay, so this is a 3-minute video, but bear with me, because I want you to know, and I want to talk through, I'm going to pause it throughout. You probably won't be able to hear it, but I'm going to talk you through as we watch this video what a high school portal looks like. So if you're asking yourself, maybe you're a brand new counselor, or maybe you're a counselor that's been in the game, but you've never really had a student go to a Division I or II school, you have a high school portal on the NCAA Eligibility Center. And then it's going to, as we walk through it, I'll kind of pause it and stop and talk so you can see what this screen looks like. So to go into Eligibility Center, you can see they're already in the portal, but all you have to do is just search NCAA Eligibility Center. So once you get to the website, you're going to scroll down and you're going to go view the high school portal. Okay, you can always Google Eligibility Center high school portal as well. So that takes you to this page. If you do not know what your login is, please reach out, drop in a question or answer, or I'll leave my email address at the end of this presentation. I would be happy to help you retrieve your login information. Maybe you're a new counselor and the old counselor didn't leave that information, but for you to even access this NCAA Eligibility Center portal for your school, you have to have a PIN number. So I want to make sure that you all are aware of how to get that. So as you're looking at this screen, this is what your high school portal looks like. As you see their resources, they're going to click on the resources in a second. And that's absolutely like where I go anytime I have an NCAA question. I pretend like I'm a high school counselor, go in, and they have so many great resources for you all. Questions, your NCAA courses that your school has approved, how to submit a fee waiver. So we're going to just kind of walk through this together. As you see, they're hovering over resources. You can go to your home page. Remember that every year of students that graduate, they're going to be listed on this portal. So you're not just going to have the current students, you're going to have the past students. So I'm going to pause it right there. This is the resource page. I don't know if anyone has ever stopped and looked at the Eligibility Center resource page before, but this is probably the most helpful section you can come to. Counselor resources, and then these tools. How to use the portal is the video that we're on right now. It gives you a video on how to request your PIN, for an established account, which most of the high schools in Mississippi already have established accounts, how to look up your registered students, how to change the address to your school, and then there's how to submit a fee waiver. All of those things are listed here. So if you ever find yourself lost, not only can you consider Get to College a resource for this information, you can always consider the NCAA Eligibility Center. I have their number as well at the end that I can give you. But this is a great resource page as you have parents that have questions. Well, my student's going to be a Division I athlete and she needs this information. There's a guide, a guide for the college-bound student athlete. All of these resources you can point your students to. You can email them the link to it. You can't be the wealth of all the knowledge, but you can at least know where the resources are to send those to your students. And this is a great page and place to do that. So this is the Eligibility Center resource page. As you comb through this, I say just click on different things and watch them if it's something that you're interested in. Now, when it comes to your core courses, like I mentioned earlier, as a counselor, you're responsible for making sure that your high school's core courses are up to date. One thing, as I've probably worked with about 50 student athletes in the past 6 years who've gone on to Division I or II schools. And what I find is that a lot of schools, they're like, well, I'm actually taking earth science right now, which is a course that's taught by a certified teacher, but for some reason it was never approved because it was never sent to the NCAA Eligibility Center. And so that class didn't count for that student because the course was never approved and it wasn't on their approved core course list. So it's important that as new courses are being developed and new classes, maybe you're teaching a different curriculum and you have different teachers that are teaching different classes, that you go in and update them so that the student's not penalized. Well, I took the classes my counselor told me to, they just weren't on the portal. And that's where compliance officers at different colleges and universities go and evaluate transcripts. Did they take the classes they were supposed to take? And did they get the scores that they needed? Okay, so this is where you'll access your student portals, where you'll access the list of those courses. So you can click there and it shows you this date right here, shows you when they were last updated. So if you've been in a position for 5 years at your high school and you go into your high school portal and you say, wait a second, these haven't been updated since 2013, it's probably time to go in and update those courses. And there's a step-by-step tutorial on how to update those as well. So consider this portal as the beginning to anything you could possibly need to get your student eligible and get the information that the coaches need on the university side. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because another thing that I think is important is how to submit a fee waiver. Okay, I'll pause it here. This is how you pull a student report. If your student has said, well, Miss Holloway, I've already completed my Eligibility Center account. I need you to update my fee waiver because that's a step in the process. They will not show up on your list until they've created that account. So first off, if they're not showing up, they probably haven't created it yet. And second, as they show up, you can put in their graduation year. They'll have a generated NCAA ID. I'll show you where that's located. And then you'll put in their name and then, or you can put in their date of birth. So it'll pull up that student and you'll be able to then go and click their information and submit a fee waiver for them. Now remember, the only people who are eligible for fee waivers are students who receive free and reduced lunch at your high school, same students that are eligible for ACT fee waivers and application fee waivers. So as you look at this tutorial, they select currently enrolled students only, so students that are enrolled at your school currently, so you would do it by the year. And then they're going to search those students and select one to submit a fee waiver for. So we're going to fast forward here. All right, so here's the student. This takes you, once you put in the search criteria, whether you search by last name or graduation year, it'll take you to the student. It shows you their NCAA ID. Okay, you'll click that student, and then from there, you'll click I verify that the student will receive a waiver of the ACT or SAT, whichever one, if they're eligible for it. And then you'll put your name and sign off on it. So we're not going to go through any more of this portal. Just know sometimes submitting a fee waiver is the most complicated thing. If for some reason your student isn't showing up on your student list and they promise that they've had an account, make sure that you're seeing the page with their NCAA ID on it, because a lot of times that is what is keeping them from showing up on your list. Is maybe they transposed one of those numbers on their NCAA ID. If you're going into another way to your high school portal, you can go to eligibilitycenter.org/course list, and you can look right now what courses are already on your list. I think you'd be surprised, especially mid to post pandemic, as you see maybe you've added a lot of classes that you didn't realize you did that aren't listed on there. So be sure to check. You can list your high school seed code as well to log into your school to see, okay, what courses am I offering? Because I want to make sure I have everything up to date for the students that are pursuing collegiate athletic career. So that is what that page looks like. And then when we get to, student information, I'm going to show you what that NCAA ID looks like. Okay. So let's kind of shift course here and talk about what core courses are. So we talked about how to list them onto your student portal, but what are those actual core courses? I am not going to read these to you because your counselors, you make schedules in your sleep, you know what these are, but I will make a quick reminder of, as there are different, as MDE has new degree tracks and diploma tracks, be sure, I see a lot of times that student athletes took the route of maybe taking a welding or career path. Those courses are not on the core course list. And so what's happening is students aren't meeting the academic requirements that they need to be eligible because they took career focused courses and not the college preparatory courses, the 4 Englishes, the math, the sciences, social science, foreign language, and then the electives. So it's really important that you make sure that if a student, and I know you can't always anticipate an athlete, student athlete going to college and playing collegiate sports, but if it is something, if coaches have made you aware that the student is going in that area, make sure that you're advising them not to take career-oriented courses because they will not count for their eligibility purposes when it comes to their academic requirements. All right, moving forward, this is a great plan. I know a lot of times students are taking some of their math and some of their science or social science, really Mississippi studies. A lot of times you'll see a student take their algebra class in 8th grade or Mississippi studies and world geography in 8th grade as well. Those do count, although they're taken in 8th grade. Most of the time it's just 9th grade forward, but if they're high school level courses, they will go retroactively and count those for their eligibility. But this is a great track. I know students, especially student athletes, it's so hard to fit in their schedule because they have to take practice and if they take any other elective. But we want to make sure, ideally, that they have all the courses they need where we're only taking 1 or 2 their senior year that's required. This is the NCAA's recommendation. This is a pretty balanced view. We're going to take 4 in 9th, 4 10th, 4 11th, 4 12th. A lot of times you'll see students take more of their core courses in 10th and 11th grade, but we just want to make sure we're not having to take 6 to 8 core courses in their senior year, which really isn't allowed. There are some exceptions because of COVID. So just making you aware, this is a great degree check as you're making schedules for students who potentially could be going to a Division 1 or 2 school. So now we've kind of talked, okay, your responsibility as counselors, how to navigate the NCAA Eligibility Center portal, what those core courses are and how to update them. But let's talk about the advising of student athletes. You know better than anyone that it's not just the coach's responsibility or the teacher's responsibility to advise them, but as you kind of walk them through the scheduling process and the counseling process, you want to be as knowledgeable as possible. So for a student who is pursuing a collegiate athletic career at a Division 1 or 2 school, they must be certified by the Eligibility Center. There's 2 different types of accounts. There's a certification account and just a profile, an NCAA profile. If your student creates a profile, that's only good for a Division III school. They have their own different requirements as long as they meet the admissions requirements of the university. Whereas Division I or II, not only does the student have to make a certification account be eligible at the Eligibility Center standards, they also have to be accepted into the college and university. So they have to meet two separate requirements, okay? Also, a student has to have this account before they sign a national letter of intent, or they can take official visits. They have to have this account because the college coach has to have the information on this certification account. One thing I want to remind you of is you might have seen this working with students who are high school athletes. Their amateurism and their academic eligibility is not officially certified until they're on, the easiest way to say it is, until they're on a coach's radar. So they can put in, you can put in their transcript, you can put in their fee waiver, they can put in their biographic information, their information about the sports that they've played. But until the college puts them on their list, they're not officially receiving that certification. They're not officially receiving their eligibility and their amateurism certification. So just know it's not anything you're doing, but they have to be on that school's IRL list. All right. Also, that fee that we talked about is $90. It is pretty expensive, but like I mentioned, if your student gets ACT fee waivers, then they're eligible to receive a fee waiver for that fee. And thinking about their task. So this is a picture of what the dashboard looks like as a student enters into their Eligibility Center account. Just like the FAFSA, like Shannon mentioned, we're in the middle of helping students do their FAFSA. It's important that they write down usernames and passwords. So you can locate, and the student can locate their NCAA ID at the top right-hand corner of their Eligibility Center profile. They'll create a username and password, they'll put their email address, and this is where they're able to see, okay, what task am I missing? It'll let them know if the fee waiver has been submitted. It'll let them know if their transcript has been submitted, if they're missing any information when they were supposed to put about the sports that they played. All of that information will be on their dashboard for the Eligibility Center. So thinking about tasks for student athletes, one, they need to review the dashboard. What am I missing? Two, they need to update their graduation or enrollment dates if needed. A lot of times you'll see student athletes try to graduate a semester early. If that doesn't happen, they need to go back and say, okay, I'm actually graduating May of 2022 and not December of 2021. So they'll need to make sure they're keeping their graduation date and enrollment date as current as possible. They need to make sure that their transcript has been submitted, not annoying counselors to do it, but just see if the transcript has been submitted, and then make sure that their account, their sport information, their school information is up to date. So if for some reason you get a student at your high school that this is their first year and it's their junior year and they've already created one of these accounts, they need to make sure that they have completed not only the information for their former high school, but the high school that they're currently enrolled in. So these are kind of the top 4 things that they need to be focused on. And then just a reminder, here's a close-up of what that NCAA looks like, that ID looks like. Tells them the graduation date, it tells them the enrollment date, so it's important to keep that information current, like mentioned before. And just some tips. Now, this presentation is going to be available. All of this information, though, is in the college guide for college-bound student athlete. It's in that guide as well. They must apply and be accepted to universities, the universities that they are being looked at for. So be sure that not only, I have lots of students all the time. I was talking to an athlete, he's at Auburn right now playing. And I remember when we were doing his Eligibility Center account, I said, okay, have you applied to, he had schools from all over the state of Mississippi, as well as Alabama, Arkansas, looking at him. And he's like, well, I don't want to apply yet, because if I apply, then they'll think I'm going to that school. That's not true. You have to be accepted into the college. It's okay to apply to multiple colleges. It's not like a tricky game. The college coach isn't going to the admissions office to so-and-so apply. It's good to get that information out there. It's good to go ahead and put your application in. I can assure you, if schools like Auburn and Alabama and Tennessee are looking for you, they're not going to be upset that they put in multiple applications to different colleges, because you're not just an athlete. The student is a student athlete. So it's important that they not only fill out the Eligibility Center certification, but their academic application as well. They should make sure that they're being in contact not only with their coaches at the colleges, but also offices of admissions and financial aid, making sure, okay, if a student's going to a Division II school, not only do they get athletic aid, but they could potentially get academic aid as well. So it's important to know, okay, what are scholarships that are available? Now, if they're going to Division I school, they're most likely going to be full scholarship or no scholarship, depending on the sport. So it's important to make sure that they have information. They're just not blindly listening to whatever a college coach is telling them, but they're talking with other schools they're talking with other departments. How much does it cost to go to this school? What is the financial aid like? Because sometimes sports aren't forever. So we have to make sure that we're prepared for whatever the outcomes are. So encouraging them to do that. And then lastly, sharing their ID with recruiting coaches, because it's important that the recruiting coaches are able to access their Eligibility Center account. So making sure they have that written down. It might be a good practice to let the high school coach also have that NCAA ID as well as they're hearing from college coaches. All right, so just a few reminders, proactive actions for students. You want to make sure that they're sharing their NCAA ID, like I mentioned, applying to those schools, and then requesting their final amateurism certification, before they are enrolled. So if the student's enrolling in the fall semester, they have to have their amateurism certified by April 1. If they're enrolling in the spring, it has to be by October 1. That cannot be done unless they're on the institution's request list, which their IRL list. Unless the institution, the college says, I want this student, we're interested in this student, that amateurism won't be certified. So that's not your fault if it's not happening. I just had several counselors say, why hasn't this been certified? I've done everything I need to do. Now it's on the college's part. They have to put that student on their list to be certified. All right, so just a little bit, I don't want to overwhelm. I know that a lot of times this isn't necessarily the most pertinent information. I do want to get information about updates, but I will say there are two major divisions, Division I and II. These are the ones where students can receive athletic scholarships. There are 4 different outcomes, certification outcomes for students for Division I. Meaning a student's an early academic qualifier. That means before their 7th semester in high school, they have everything they need. They have the courses, they're on track with the GPA. That means they're already an academic qualifier. They're going to be able, when they get to college, to get scholarship, to compete, and to practice. Okay, qualifier will be able to, as they get on to their senior year, as they meet the GPA requirements and the ACT requirements, they'll be able to practice, compete, and receive aid. But then academic red shirt will be able to receive, meaning if they have a lower GPA, don't have the scores that they need, didn't take the classes to finish, they're an academic red shirt, they can practice and get aid, but they cannot compete. And the non-qualifiers can do none of those. So that's why it's so important. And we tell students, just like you do, everything you do from 9th grade forward, it counts, especially for student athletes. You can't make C's and D's your 9th and 10th grade year and expect to pull it up and have the GPA you need. The same with Division II. There's 3 outcomes. You have your early academic and qualifier. Those can practice, compete, and receive athletic aid, but then your partial qualifier will not be able to compete. They'll have to, it's kind of like a redshirt period. So there are different types. As if you have a question and you have a student athlete that's pursuing a collegiate athletic career, I would be happy to help you evaluate their transcript. Do they meet the qualifications? How do I evaluate this? If you'd like to learn the process of how to evaluate a transcript to find the core course GPA for a student athlete based off approved core courses, I know that was a long sentence, that was kind of confusing. I can help you. All that to say, I can help you figure out if they meet that GPA standard. And so we're going to talk in a second about how ACT has shifted and how those scores are not taken into consideration much anymore, but did want to make you aware of the Division I and II alternative standards. So that was a lot of information in a really quick time frame, but it's high level. Like I said, as a counselor, your biggest responsibility is to have the information in the student portal, the core courses updated, and the fee waiver submitted, and transcript. So knowing the information that you know, you'll be able to do exactly what the student needs you to do on their behalf as a student athlete. But I want to talk about COVID-19 updates and what's important for you all to know. First off, before I get there, Kirsten made a point when she was doing the introduction of this information is very time relevant, because everything I'm telling you could potentially change for your juniors. So right now, your seniors that are graduating and going to enroll in college for 2022-23, this information is pertinent to them. But it is most likely going to change for your juniors that are going to college. So be on the lookout. We'll probably do one of these next year, updating you on what the NCAA has decided. But know that right now, this information is just affecting your seniors that are graduating and the ones that have graduated the past 2 years. So biggest update is that standardized test scores are excluded from the NCAA initial eligibility criteria. Before, it was a sliding scale. To be eligible, your student had to have a certain GPA in their college preparatory courses with a corresponding ACT or SAT score. So the higher the student's GPA, the lower their ACT score could be. But now the NCAA Eligibility Center is just looking at GPA, a minimum of a 2.3 GPA and higher for initial eligibility. Also, they just released on a webinar I sat in on last week that there is an NCAA test score task force. That's a tongue twister. And they have come out and said, we believe that ACT and standardized test scores should not be used as a criteria for a student athlete's eligibility. Now, that was a recommendation that was given. They have not said, okay, now officially we are not requiring that, but the recommendation has been made. So we're just waiting for the NCAA to say, okay, we agree with this, let's move forward. So be on the lookout for that information. We'll try to keep you updated. If you get our college countdown newsletter, maybe we can stick it in there as soon as we hear back. So be sure to opt in to receive newsletters, because as we get timely information, we want to push it out to you all that are in the field. So that's an update on standardized test scores. Also, distance learning. So the Eligibility Center always requires a review of new courses. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they are not going to require a separate review of distance or e-learning programs used for those 2 years. Now, the important thing to remember is if a sophomore took a course in 21-22, that counts for them. Although by the time they graduate, you may have to have reviewed courses since then. If they took the class in 2021 and 21-22, it does not have to go through a separate review process. So know that this policy applies to students from all grade levels who complete the distance learning courses during those academic years. So as you're updating your core course list, know that it doesn't have to go through a separate process, where normally if it was e-learning, it would have to go through a different certification process. And then lastly, one of the biggest updates, which you all are probably aware of, is that the NCAA now has an opportunity for students to benefit from their name, image, and likeness. I think that this is a victory for all student athletes across the country, but know that it is still a lot of unknowns. So the NCAA has a policy, but what it's going to come down to is the state that the student is playing in will have their own kind of policy for name, image, and likeness rules. So if you have questions about that, I'm learning it just as you're learning it. So I was reading just last night about the resources for the name, image, and likeness, and reading those policies. It's a little bit unclear, but it all came basically down to the state is the one that's making the judgment on it. I know that Mississippi is about to go into a legislative session. I know that this is probably going to be something that they further discuss, but also you can talk to MHSAA or MAIS. They're probably all having these conversations, as well as the school's compliance office at the college they're interested in. My biggest rule that I always tell a student athlete as they're coming to me and talking about going to college, maybe they're interacting with college coaches, is to ask tons of questions. We are not oblivious to know that not everyone follows the rules, but we never want a student to be in a situation where they got themselves in a predicament because they didn't ask the right question, or they trusted someone that maybe they shouldn't have trusted. So when it comes to the name, image, and likeness, or recruiting practices, or dead periods and quiet periods, when coaches can and can't talk to the student, if the student and parent has questions and you don't know the answer, please feel free to ask. We can call the NCAA Eligibility Center. We can call the school's compliance office. We want to make sure that the student themselves is taken care of, that he or she is doing everything by the book and what they need to do to be a successful student athlete in college. So the name, image, and likeness is a great new thing that's happening, but we're still waiting to hear more about it. But it is an opportunity for students to get recognition and benefits from their likeness, their profile being used as a student athlete. So that's a great update. As we finish up, we're going to get into the time of question and answer, but I did want you all to know of some resources. Get to college, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're not going to put things out for the college-bound student athlete because the NCAA already does it really, really well. If you have questions or you have coaches that are asking you questions, I say print them out a copy of the college-bound student athlete or the guide there's a coaching guide and there's a counselor guide. And it has lots of great resources about things like, when is it appropriate for a college coach to contact my player? I don't think it's your responsibility to know all of those things, but if you want to know where that information lives, it lives in these eligibility flyers, the academic requirements, the college-bound student athlete guide. So know that these websites are available. And then lastly, here is this QR code takes you straight to a PDF of frequently asked questions about the Eligibility Center and COVID. It was really helpful, answered a lot of my questions. Some of the information you heard here today is a result of that flyer. So feel free to take a picture of that with your phone and go to that flyer. If you need help accessing it, you can shoot me an email. Like Shannon and Kirsten said earlier, my name is Tori Holloway. I work as a counselor, a college counselor, and help students across the state go to college, but also have the pleasure of helping high school athletes go to colleges all across the state of Mississippi and out of state. So if you have a student that this whole time you were thinking, man, I really wish that their parent or that student or my coach could hear this, please feel free to give them my email address. I would be happy to do a transcript evaluation or talk to the coach or give them information about best practices and information about Eligibility Center, or help them create their Eligibility Center profile. That's also a service that I can offer as well. And then lastly, here's the number for high school administrators and counselors for the Eligibility Center, and then students and families. I will say they do answer really quickly. I have called probably 50 times. Okay, maybe like 45, but a good bit of times I've called and asked questions, and they're very, very helpful. So if you ever find yourself not able to get in touch with me, you can feel free to call the actual NCAA Eligibility Center. Those numbers are there as well. Thank y'all so much. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope it was helpful and you feel up to date about the college process for the student athlete and the updates with the counselor portal.
Shannon, you're on mute.
All right, Kirsten, do we have any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing any.
No.
Okay, maybe I think we might have just seen one pop up. All right, someone is asking if they can get a copy. So yes, we will be sending the presentation out afterwards. So y'all will be able to get a copy of that. All right. Any more questions before we move on to our closing? As we said, as Tori said earlier, she's always available to help you guys. So she knows way more about this than anybody else in our office. So I would take her up on that offer if you had some questions or some student athletes that you were working with. So I'll kind of move into the closing. Y'all feel free to still drop a question in there if you have one. So thank you again, Tori, for this helpful and informative presentation. For all our participants, we would appreciate it if you would complete the short survey that will automatically pop up at the end of this meeting. Please fill it out and give us feedback on today's webinar so that we can keep improving these webinars. Stay tuned for our next Topic Tuesday webinar, which will be on Tuesday, December the 7th. During that webinar, we will be discussing Phi Theta Kappa International Honor Society and the benefits of its membership for your students. That is the December webinar will be the last one for this fall series. So if you have participated in all 5 fall webinars, you will have the opportunity to apply for 0.5 CEUs. And I have been working on those CEU forms all along the way. So I've got those up to date and I'll have those ready to push out at the end of the fall session. So we will also continue our Topic Tuesday series in the spring semester with additional CEU opportunities. So if you participate in all 5 of these for the spring, you'll be able to have the opportunity to get more CEUs. So you can see these spring topics here, and that information will be on our website as well for you to register. You can go ahead and register now. They are out there on the website. They're listed under the Educator tab, and then choose Professional Development. While you're there registering, please check out all the other resources for you and your students listed under that Educator tab. I will say all the FAFSA trackers and the high school information portal and trackers are all up to date as of today. So when you're out there registering for these webinars, you may want to take a look at the FAFSA tracker and some of the other things that are out there specific to your high school. So we do have a few other upcoming virtual training opportunities. So next week, we will launch our first ever College Access Educator training. So we're excited about that. It's a new training. It's about an hour and a half, and it will cover all things college access and how to work with your students in a more meaningful way as you move through the college process with them. So that is next week on November 10th from 9 to 10:30. And then we'll offer another one of those. It'll be the same exact training on January 19th. And we'll offer that particular session in the afternoon from 3 to 4:30. Again, those trainings are listed on our website under Professional Development. A few other things, we have been conducting college and career readiness teacher chats this fall. We'll continue those this spring. We have a January, February, and March date, and all of those will take place from 3:30 to 4:15 on each of those days. So that's the end of our presentation. If you have any further questions, here is our contact information. Before we head out, Kirsten, is there anything else we're seeing in the Q&A?
Yeah, I'm going to answer. I totally forgot to answer the poll question. I'm so sorry to keep you all waiting. It is actually 2%. So for those, I think it was like 2 or 3 people that answered 2%. So we gave you all this information about college-bound athletes, but only 2% of them, you think about the students in your high school and students across the nation. So that's why it's so important to focus on the students of the student athlete, because so few students actually get athletic aid to go to play collegiate sports. So only 2% of those students. Sorry, I completely blanked and forgot to talk about that.
Awesome. I was thinking about that as you were talking. I was like, I don't think we gave them the answer. So I'm glad that we did that. If y'all have any further questions, of course, please reach out to us at any of our offices. Those are all listed here. We do have virtual appointments available for your students who are trying to complete the FAFSA. Although those are somewhat limited at this point, but we do have plenty of availability for the spring, but we definitely have some virtual FAFSA appointments. We'll be having some FAFSA Fridays that will happen in December. So if you got those students who are still trying to complete the FAFSA, you can have them go online as well and make a virtual appointment with us there. So if y'all have any questions, let us know. And thank you for being with us today. And
Shannon, there's one last question about the CEU. Someone is asking, can they get 0.5 CEUs if they do a combination of months between fall and spring, for example, like November, December, January, February, March, or does it have to be completed within the semester?
No, it doesn't have to be completed within the semester. So you can do a combination of some fall ones and some spring ones. So that's perfectly fine. You just have to participate in at least 5 to get those 0.5 CEUs. And if you participate in all 10 for fall and spring, you'll actually have the opportunity to get 1 full CEU. So if y'all have any questions about that, you can direct that to me via email too. I'm the one taking care of that. And we're getting those out to Mississippi College. All right, if there's no further questions, we will see you all in December. I can't believe we're already in November, but we will see you guys on December 7th for our next Topic Tuesday. Hope you guys have a great day.